There's only two people that have ever been born on the face of this earth that didn't come from a woman. And as much as our society seems to want to change that, which is really weird to me, it will always be. That will not change. And we need to appreciate our gender, what God has made us, and be satisfied. Women have their place, and so do men. And both carry a great burden upon their shoulders as the separate genders, but also as a husband and a wife, and certainly as fathers and mothers. In Psalm 127, verses 3 through 5, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gates." I have a lot of respect for a couple that we know in Arkansas, and they know of a congregation that's looking for a preacher, and so they called to see if I would be looking. And she started off her text by saying, "How full is your quiver?" And I just love people that speak as the Bible speaks, and that children should not be a burden, although sometimes it is overwhelming. And I've expressed that to a few of y'all, thinking, oh my word, I'm in my 50s and starting all over again with our grandchildren. But, Dolly carries the majority of that load, much more than I would ever venture to think about. A woman said to a mother, "Oh, I'd give my life to have 2 children such as yours." The mother responded, "That's exactly what it costs." The sacrifices that mothers make for their children is overwhelming, or at least it should be. In Titus chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, or at least a little portion of verse 4, enough for us to get the context. The older women, their responsibility is that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. There are 2 concepts here that I'd like to kind of focus on, and that is that mothers need to learn. Now, there's some natural nurturing that a lot of women have, but there is a learned process of loving your children. And the reason I believe that it is a learned process is because it does require sacrifice. And we have to be taught to put ourselves second from time to time and put our children first. I also see in here homemakers. And Andy and I have talked in times past about the thermostat and so on, and he's teased me, don't you know how to use the thermostat? I don't use the thermostat. That's Dolly's domain. She is in control of that. She wants to open up the windows. Okay. But homemakers, what all is involved in that is mind-boggling to me. It's relatively easy to go and make a living in comparison to the thought and the preparation and the tenacity that it takes to deal with children. It is certainly daunting and should be respected. So this morning I'd like to, you might say, address 3 things that mothers get to do. The first is to devote their children to God. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, beginning in verse 9. So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she, that is Hannah, was in bitterness of soul. You see, Hannah had not had children, and she had a rival, another wife, Elkanah, her husband, that had children. And so Hannah was easy prey to mock and ridicule. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, which is a vow that every mother should make in that sense, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. It should be the goal of every mother to groom, to prepare this child, their child, for eternity. What a task mothers have, to be a part of the lives of their children in raising them to be God-fearing, to be people who will instill in their children a sincere desire to be disciples of Christ, to be followers of Christ, and then to ultimately become Christians, to be Christ-like. There's no greater achievement than for us to raise our children so that they are prepared to be with their eternal Father for eternity. In fact, it is much more important than any sport, much more important than any art. It's much more important than any academic achievement. There's nothing greater than training our children to be like Christ. And Hannah says, if you give me a son, I will give him to you. Secondly, obviously, to love their children. I debated whether to tell the story or to actually read the story. And I am sure that there are those who would love for me to tell the story and those who would rather me read it. Knowing I can't please all the masses, why don't we just read it instead of me trying to tell the story? Turn over to 1 Kings chapter 3. You're very familiar with this occasion. Solomon has been made king. He is sitting upon the throne. He is judging the people. He has prayed for this moment. And now he gets his opportunity to shine with the wisdom that God has blessed him with. And so we begin in verse 16 of Solomon displaying this wisdom. So in 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 16 we'll begin. Then 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, O my Lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then it happened the 3rd day after I had given birth that this woman also gave birth. And we were together. There was no one with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. In other words, there's no other witnesses of what transpired after these 2 children were born. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. So in the middle of the night, the one who lost the child steals the other child and swaps them out. And when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. It's probably still dark, and she does not, she's not able to see the child. But when I had examined him in the morning, indeed, he was not my son whom I had born. Then the other woman said, no, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. And the first woman said, no, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. Thus they spoke before the king. So they're arguing back and forth. I mean, how are you going to try to figure out? This is a little bit before DNA, right? And the king said, the one says, this is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one. And the other says, no, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two. Give half to one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son. And she said, O my Lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him. But the other said, let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him. So the king answered and said, give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother. This certainly is a loving mother. What I pull from this is that she's willing to even give up her son to be raised by someone else so that he would not die. Of course, the other woman, she's already lost her son, and she certainly doesn't care whether this son dies or not. She's already lost her own. But the love that this mother shows should be the love that all mothers have for their children. That they would not want any harm to come to them. That they would not want anything to hurt, much less kill their child. Right? I'd like to tell you a story. And I'll speak it in the mind of the son. My mom only had one eye. I hated her. She was such an embarrassment. There was one day at the elementary school, I remember that it was a field day and my mom came. I was so embarrassed. How could she do this to me? I threw a hateful look at her and ran away. All the kids taunted me. Your mom has only one eye. You know how kids can be. Because of our desperate poverty, even when I saw my mother crying out of her one eye, my heart was hardened, and it made me determined to grow up and be successful, unlike my one-eyed mother. I studied real hard. I left my mom. I got married, bought a house, had kids, and was happily successful. I like it here because it's a place where my mom never comes. I did everything I could to completely separate myself from my mother. One day, my mom showed up at our house in Shiloh. I asked her, "Who are you? I don't know you." I screamed at her, "How dare you come to my house and scare my daughter with your one eye? Get out of here now." My mother quietly answered, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I have gotten the wrong address." She disappeared. Years later, as I'm going through my mother's things, I found a letter that she wrote and never sent. My son, I think my life has been here long enough now, and I will not visit Sheol anymore. But would it be too much to ask if you would come and visit once in a while? I miss you so much. And I was so glad when I heard that you were coming for a class reunion, but I decided not to go to the school. For you. I'm so sorry that I only had one eye and that I was an embarrassment for you. You see, when you were very little, you got into an accident and lost your eye. As a mother, I couldn't stand watching you and having you grow up with one eye and be taunted and made fun of. So I gave you mine. I miss you so much. I love you. You mean the world to me. It's really sad what mothers have to endure from time to time when they're not loved and respected as they should be. And I'm guilty. Mothers, you also get to train, to teach your children. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 20, children, obey your parents. You know, sometimes mama says something and then dad has to really lay down the law. Does that ever happen? Harley, Harley, Harley. And then I say, Harley. But it's both. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. In Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, my son, hear the instructions of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. I love the way it seems to, on the heels of the mother, it's talking about jewelry, to listen to the law of your mother. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, I thank God whom I serve with a pure conscience, Paul writes to this young preacher, as my forefathers did, as without ceasing I remember you in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. And I think that those are tears of missing Paul. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. I would have to say that my mother was far more influential in my life than my dad. Not that he did not have any influence, but it was because of my mother's time and teaching and the insistence of memory verses and doing my lesson and so on and so forth that I can attribute to the man I am today. It takes sacrifice, a schedule, a routine, devotion, determination, love, and a commitment to God to groom your children in the image of Christ. It takes a lot of hard work. But it's worth it. Children are a precious gift from the Lord. They say that a man is mighty. He governs land and sea. He wields a mighty scepter on lower powers than he. but mightier power and stronger man from his throne has hurled. For the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. The influence that mothers have over their children can be compared to none other. Mothers, you are molding the next generation and souls for eternity. Take your responsibility seriously. I'm only repeating what I've heard, but the worst thing about life is it's day in and day out. And oftentimes, before we know it, the week is gone, the month is gone, and a decade is gone. We blink our eyes and our kids are gone. And we might not have seized all of the opportunities that availed us to train our children as we should. You may never have to give an eye for your child, but I sure hope you will give them to God, as Anna prayed. A true legacy is not what you leave for them. You have a will, and so maybe there's even some very specific instructions in that will. Maybe your golf clubs are going to go to a particular individual. Maybe your gun collection, or maybe your sewing stuff, or whatever that may be. They're all temporal. They'll all be destroyed someday. So a true legacy is not what you give your children. It's what you, or I should say, it's not what you leave for your children. It's what you leave in them. Instill a heart that follows Christ. That all our children, maybe as David, a man after God's own heart. May you be blessed today. May you be honored for who you are, what you've done, and what you will do for your children. Certainly this is far from teaching anyone how to be a child of God. But you know, are you devoted to God? Do you love God? Are you being trained by God to be like His Son who gave His life for you? It is our sole purpose on this earth to bring glory and honor to our Father. One day we'll all be counted, or we are now, but certainly in that day counted as that bride to the bridegroom, to be united with the Lord forever. Are you prepared for that day? Or will you hear, "Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness"? Our heart's desire is that you would be completely devoted to the Lord with every fiber of your being. And if we can help you in that, whether to become a Christian or to offer prayers to the Father on your behalf, won't you come as we stand and sing?